Myrtle Beach native Kathryn Cox Hedgepath is the creator and narrator of Myrtle Beach history, Trolley, and Step-On tours. She has traveled to 40 countries on 6 continents and uses her experience to convey our local history through a world lens. Kathryn returned home from New York City in 2002 to marry her beloved husband, Jenks, after a career in television and publishing, and she even worked at Space Shuttle Operations at NASA headquarters in Washington, D.C. for a semester before starting graduate school at Georgetown University. Her first career job was as personal assistant to television icon and wildlife expert Jim Fowler of Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom fame. Her dad, Myrtle Beach's first veterinarian, arranged a job interview when Jim Fowler spoke at a veterinary conference in Myrtle Beach. She is proud to be able to trace her family history through, in Horry County back to pre-Revolutionary War years, and enjoys sharing our local history with visitors, newcomers, and locals. So we're delighted to have her back to speak again. So let's give a big hand and a big welcome to Kathryn Cox Hedgepath.
Hello, everyone. I am she. About 10 years ago, I had the notion that in order to bring even more people to my beloved Myrtle Beach, if we had some movies that really lured people in, like the success that some coastal communities along North Carolina had with Nicholas Sparks films, that people would just go there just because the movie had been made there, that maybe we would have the same success. So I thought, well, how do I encourage someone to make one of those alluring films? So the thought was that, well, we've had a number of movies made in Myrtle Beach already. Perhaps if I compiled a book and told basically how it was done or why they were made here before, that would inspire future filmmakers. So this was the result, Myrtle Beach Movies. On the front, we have Sharon Tate. Now, the picture of her on the cover and inside the book was taken by my favorite photographer, Jack Thompson. Now, if you're from this area or you spend any time here, you know historian and photographer Jack Thompson, because 75 years ago this summer, he began his professional career. Yeah, he was 13 at the time, but yes, that he was absolutely a professional photographer at the Myrtle Beach Pavilion. So that's why I made sure if I was going to do a Myrtle Beach history book, the fact that I was able to sneak in Jack's name with mine, yeah, that was a plus. Now, why was Sharon Tate in Myrtle Beach? Well, she was here on June 9th, 1967 for the world premiere of Don't Make Waves. It was the only time, now this was distributed by MGM. Don't Make Waves' world premiere held in Myrtle Beach was the only time that a major motion picture studio has had a world premiere here. Now, you have Sharon Tate, her co-star Dave Draper, and then a whole slew of other celebrities who were not actually in the movie. MGM was just using this sort of as an excuse, a platform to promote their other artists. So you'll see Stuart Kramer, Sue Ann Langdon, Barbara Moore, Jack Emmerich. Now see, Jack and Stuart, they were actually the husbands of Sue Ann, and then Terry Moore, and then you have Dave Draper, Sharon Tate, and then various local dignitaries who were welcoming them. Now, Terry Moore had been in Peyton Place about 10 years before that. That's how people knew her, and that was her claim to fame. And then later on, we found out that she was the secret wife of Howard Hughes. So now, after they arrived at the airport, they had sort of a little press jug. They had a lot of things to do that day because it was during our Sun Fun Festival. The Don't Make Waves world premiere was the highlight of the festival. So you see here Sharon and Dave Draper. Now, Dave Draper was an actor, but the year before, he had been named Mr. Universe of 1966. And they're being greeted by various dignitaries at the base. Colonel William Williams was the commander at the base at the time. This picture was taken at the Officers Club. Then throughout the day, I'm pretty sure this was taken at the Thunderbird Motel, because that was the site of the Miss Waves beauty pageant. The winner won a trip to New York and a screen test with MGM. But the real star, of course, was Sharon. So this was just prior to the premiere. There were 2 screenings, one at 7:45 and one at 10 o'clock at the Rivoli Theater. Now, she's on stage right there in front of the marquee. The gentleman was a local news personality from WECT up in Wilmington who was acting as MC for the event. And then behind her, you can see what stretched from all the way from the top of the building all the way down were what looked like banner plane banners, the letters that you would see on a banner plane. And it said, world premiere, Martin Ransohoff's Don't Make Waves, Sharon Tate, David Draper. Now, this was not the first movie she ever made, but it was the first one to be released. So this world premiere, or this movie premiere, was her very first movie premiere. Now, Ransohoff was the co-head of a production company called Filmways. They made movies, but they also made television shows like The Beverly Hillbillies, Green Acres, Petticoat Junction. In fact, it was Ransohoff who discovered Sharon Tate when she was auditioning for Petticoat Junction. Now look at that beauty. You can't put that into a sitcom. No, he wanted to have her in motion pictures, but she didn't have a lot of experience. So to give her the experience that she needed, he put her in uncredited roles in some of his TV shows. Most notably, she had a recurring role on The Beverly Hillbillies, where she wore a black wig and portrayed Janet Trago, who was assistant to Miss Hathaway in Mr. Drysdale's Bank. Now, that's what the Rivoli Theater looked like in 1967. Today, it looks like this. It's almost identical. Where it says Ground Zero, that is a Christian youth organization that rents the building from the city who now owns the building. You used to say Rivoli there, you used to say theater at the top, but pretty much it's as it was. So how did it come to be that a world premiere was held in Myrtle Beach? Well, part of that came from the allure of Slim Pickens. Because you see, the Sun Fun Festival back then was sponsored by the Chamber of Commerce. And it was April of '67, before Don't Make Waves came, a press release was sent out and said that the Chamber had had such success with the year before in '66 with a regional premiere that they wanted to go big time in '67 with the world premiere. Well, that regional premiere was of a remake of the 1939 classic Stagecoach. And for the festivities, the actor Slim Pickens drove an actual stagecoach through Myrtle Beach. With him, he had a Miss Myrtle Beach and a former Miss Myrtle Beach. They gave him the key to the city. And then, what kind of gift do you give to represent this area? To a dignitary, you give them a Pawleys Island hammock. And he was thrilled. He said, I just hope it's big enough for me to get in with my boots on. Now, Don't Make Waves wasn't made in Myrtle Beach. A lot of people think it was. There are some really reliable sources out there online and in person who will say that it was. It wasn't. We had to wait until 1984 to get our first movie made in Myrtle Beach, Chain Gang. It was in 3D. But that wasn't the headline. That was like the secondary story, because what people were really buzzing about was that we were going to get our own studio. It was going to be an international sensation. Tourists would come from everywhere to see Studio City. It was not only was it going to have that world-class studio, it was going to have an amusement park, a shopping complex. So, as you see, on June 10th, 1983 was the groundbreaking. Now, that was held out in an area, when I'm talking about this on my tours, I'm usually at the Market Commons. So if you know that part of the world, if you're on the bypass headed south to the sort of the Surfside, Socastee area, you pass, if you're on the bypass, you pass over 544, and there's a lot of development. You might not even notice that off to the right, there is a residential community called Queens Harbor. Well, back in '83, there was nothing there, just trees and sandy dirt. And that's basically where the groundbreaking took place. You can see there was equipment in the background. On hand was Governor Dick Riley, and by his side was the visionary, Earl Owensby. Now, the media had a nickname for him. They called him the King of the Bees. B-movies, that is. Now, not to be confused with independent films, which often have a small budget like a B-movie. An independent film can sometimes be a piece of cinematic art. Yeah, B-movies, not so much. They tend to be campy. Sometimes they're so bad that they're good, and that's what Earl Owensby was the master of. Now, in 1973, he basically took himself from rags to riches. In '73, he was a self-made millionaire, and he saw the movie Walking Tall. Now, he liked the movie, but what really resonated with him was that it wasn't made out in Hollywood. It was made on location in Tennessee. Now, at that point, he had a lot of business experience in his background, and that business mind of his started clicking, and he thought, if you can make a movie in Tennessee and make money, you can make a movie in the Carolinas and make money too. So 6 months later, he decides to make his very first movie without the slightest notion of how movies made. His whole film industry experience up to that point had been when he was in high school at a little small town up in North Carolina called Cliffside. He popped the popcorn at the local movie house. Sometimes he ran the projector. So he had to learn movie making as he did it, and he would actually edit that first film in the basement of his home. Now, he said it wasn't his favorite movie he ever made later on when he was interviewed, but it proved he could make money making movies. So he reinvested the profits of that movie and the subsequent ones and created the Earl Owensby Studios up in Shelby, North Carolina, another small town up there. And after 10 years of that lucrative formula, he turned his eyes to Myrtle Beach to take everything up to the next level with Studio City. Well, they had the groundbreaking for the studio, but then he wanted to simultaneously make that first movie, Chain Gang. So he builds a prison camp set out there where Queens Harbor is basically now, the Black Creek Correctional Unit. Now, my parents were investors in this movie, so they got the perk of being able to go out on set. So Mom and I went out there one day. That's my mother. And then, a year later, it's 1984, June, it is time for the world premiere of Myrtle Beach's first movie. Now, this is what it looks like today, this empty lot on 19th Avenue South and Kings Highway, just to the side of the pickleball courts. You may have seen this, but out there in 84, there was a multiplex, and you had locals, pillars of the community leaders, all gathered with our little 3D glasses on, really not knowing what to expect. And let me tell you, we got it all. There was nudity, language, violence, and all in 3D. We were mortified. Now, Studio City did not get the funding that it needed, and that particular project was scrapped. But let me tell you, we certainly caught the eye of the big movie houses out in California, because in the next 10 years, the next 3 movies made in Myrtle Beach were distributed by Warner Brothers, MGM, and Disney. 1989, the most beloved movie ever to be made in Myrtle Beach, Shag. Now, you may know that the Shag is the state dance of South Carolina as of 1984. Well, the year before, in 1983, 2 comedy writers for Saturday Night Live, Lanier Laney and Terry Sweeney, pitched the idea to an executive at MGM for the movie Shag. Now, after they made their pitch, the guy said, "I've never heard of this dance, and I don't really know what you're talking about, but you guys are funny, so I'm going to greenlight this project." So according to Lanier Laney, it's a miracle Shag ever got made to start with. Now, the inspiration for the film came in 1977. Now, Lanier was born in Spartanburg, South Carolina, and grew up there. And then 2 weeks out of every June, his family would come down to the Grand Strand to vacation, specifically in Pawleys Island, and that's how he learned about the Shag lifestyle. He was a little boy in 1963, that's the setting of the movie, but his elder brother was a teenager, and so he would learn from observation. But when he graduated from the University of South Carolina and went up to New York in 77, Lanier says he was just shocked at how Southerners were perceived by New Yorkers. He said, they all thought we were like that TV show, The Dukes of Hazzard, or worse. And that was not the South that Lanier knew. He grew up poolside at the Spartanburg Country Club. He wanted to write a screenplay about well-bred Southern girls who like to have fun. And that's what he did. These 4 ladies in cinema land, they are Luann, Milena, Carson, and Pudge. These 4 girls have just graduated from Spartanburg High School and have come to Myrtle Beach for one last fling in the summer of '63. Now, as you see, they're portrayed by Paige Hanna. Now, let me tell you, these girls weren't really known that well because they had just started their careers, but they pretty much all came from Hollywood royalty. So, Paige Hanna, her big sister was Daryl Hanna. Bridget Fonda is daughter of Peter Fonda, niece of Jane Fonda, granddaughter of Henry Fonda. Phoebe Cates soon became the wife of Kevin Kline, and Annabeth Gish. Now, Annabeth had a grandmother named Lillian. She just wasn't that Lillian Gish. But however, there's another actress, the late Carrie Hamilton, who played bad girl Nadine. Anybody have a clue as to who Carrie Hamilton's celebrity mom is? Any idea at all? Carol Burnett, there you go. Now, when the movie opens, we are in Spartanburg, well, in our imagination, because the first set that you see is the exterior of the senator's house. Luann is the senator's daughter, and she has borrowed her mother's car to go pick up all her girlfriends and take them to the beach. That house was actually in Myrtle Beach, but today it looks like this, the corner of 52nd Avenue North and Ocean Boulevard. It's a beautiful development of beach houses, but in the movie, it was this lovely hill with a long driveway, and at the top was sort of a classical mansion on Myrtle Beach's standards. And then, when she picks up all her girlfriends, they go to the beach, and in the movie, they're supposed to stay at the senator's beach house. But ironically, the beach house wasn't in Myrtle Beach. It was at Mount Hope Plantation down in Georgetown. Now, this picture was taken back in 2009 when it was on the annual Georgetown plantation tours. I checked the itinerary for this year. It is not cycled back on. I'm hoping that it will get back on the itinerary, because if you can get into that house, when we were there in 2009, you were able to go through most of where a lot of that movie was made. They utilized almost all of that structure. And then the second house you see as the movie opens is Pudge's house. It's supposed to be in Spartanburg, actually in Myrtle Beach. This is what it looks like now. But when you see the movie, the thing that stands out that's still there today is that patio, that railing around the patio. That's where Pudge's mom waves goodbye to the girls as they peel out of that driveway and head to the beach. Now, it's exciting enough to have an MGM movie, but even more exciting is to have a Disney movie. Wild Hearts Can't Be Broken. They came here in the fall of 1990 and transformed our Myrtle Beach Pavilion into the Atlantic City Steel Pier of the 1930s. Now, the two stars that, there's another major star. Cliff Robertson was in the movie. Spoiler alert, his character dies off before they make it to Atlantic City. So the two stars who were in Myrtle Beach were Gabrielle Anwar and Michael Scofield. Now, if you remember Scent of a Woman with Al Pacino and that lovely tango scene, that was Gabrielle. And she had not done that movie when she starred in this one. And then Michael Scofield, for those of you of a certain age, back in the summer of 1984, he starred in a movie called 16 Candles. And if you were a young woman of a certain age, you know exactly who Michael Scofield is. In fact, he did about 7 films. He was the heartthrob in all of them. But then, after Wild Hearts, he just gave it all up. This was his last movie. He decided to return to his native Pennsylvania, raise his family, and handcraft furniture. Here is somebody else that was supposed to be in the movie. That's my dad, Dr. Cox, dressed as a police officer. Well, the tragedy is that Daddy was so excited to be in this Disney movie that one day, all dressed up, going to set, I don't think he was late, I just think he wanted just to get there quickly. And he decided to take a shortcut. For those of you who remember the Myrtle Beach Pavilion, the amusement park that was right across from the pavilion, there was a sort of a stone wall or a brick wall around it. Well, Daddy decided that he was going to climb over the wall and run over to set. Unfortunately, I don't know if you can tell, there's a lot of accoutrements hanging off of him. And he was a little advanced in age at that point. Anyway, crawls over the wall, pulls something, has to be taken to the hospital by ambulance, and misses out being in the movie altogether. Poor Dad. But while we're talking about Dad for just a split second, the reason I chose to speak today on March 1st, this would have been Daddy's 102nd birthday. I wanted to honor him. Now, if you're going around the museum and you look at the World War II memorial upstairs, you'll find Daddy's name, and you'll find actually his father's name under the World War I. And then another thing, this room is very special to our family because in the spring of 1954, at a public concert, Daddy first laid eyes on Mom in this room, but they did not meet here. They met later. It was Mother's Day weekend at the Ocean Forest Hotel at a dance. Fast forward to 1980, in the spring, I first laid eyes on Jenks Hedgepath. We did not meet here. 22 years later we met, and next month we celebrate our 21st wedding anniversary. So thank you for all this, honoring my dad on the birthday in this space. Okay, back to the movies. Now, this is the site. This is what the pavilion site looks like today, 8th Avenue, North Ocean Boulevard. But Disney, as I said, transformed our pavilion into the Atlantic City Steel Pier. Some they used actual physical structures, and some I think they used a little CGI, or the equivalent of that back then. Now, so Gabrielle and Michael, they were Sonora and Al, performed at that steel pier. They were he was the MC, and then she was the girl horse diver. They really did do this back in the 30s at Atlantic City. They would have a horse go up a ramp 40 feet up in the air and then dive into a pool. For the purposes of the movie, that didn't happen. The horses jumped no more than 10 feet into a pool of water, and in fact, they liked it so much because, see, Disney went all out. They hired the best horse wranglers. They were just totally in cahoots with the American Humane Society that monitored every aspect of the production. So everybody was on board. These horses were actually well cared for and having fun. In fact, when they weren't shooting, they actually had to close off the ramp to their pool because the horses and the dogs on the ranch where they were filming kept running up there and jumping in because they enjoyed it so much. Now, they performed at the Steel Pier, but Sonora and Al had to live in Atlantic City while they were performing, and they lived in this house, so to speak. This house is on the Golden Mile, and there are at least three exterior scenes were shot right here. The next movie to come along was Warner Brothers' first of two movies. In 1994, Chasers. It was directed by Dennis Hopper. Now, he made a cameo appearance. This is what he looked like in there. He had a prosthetic nose. And now, for you movie buffs, you might realize that in 1969, when he starred in Easy Rider, that was the first feature film he directed. Chasers was the last feature film he ever directed and the only comedy. Now, at the time, he had a second home up in Wilmington. He had starred in two movies at that point in Wilmington, Blue Velvet and Super Mario Brothers, and he really liked the place. So much so that he purchased the old abandoned Masonic temple in order to create a studio for his painting and his photography. Those were his other passions. But he was so enamored of the architecture of the building, he wanted to pursue another dream, and that was to create an actor's studio. Because back then, in the 80s, Wilmington, North Carolina became a filmmaking hub, and it had everything the industry needed except for well-trained actors. Unfortunately, the project relied on getting state funding that never came through, so it was scrubbed. He sold the building to a developer, but he kept a loft apartment there in that building until his death in 2010. Now, the movie technically was made in Myrtle Beach, but the only scene that was actually in the city limits was one that passed by the Swamp Fox roller coaster. Now, the premise of the movie, it's a sort of a road trip odd couple film. Two polar opposite Navy guys from Charleston, the naval base there, were tasked with a routine prisoner transport. They have to drive up to Camp Lejeune, pick up a prisoner from the Marine brig and bring her back down to Charleston. And on the way, they drive through Myrtle Beach, and in a pivotal moment in the plot where the two men are sort of bonding, or at least getting to know each other, inside their transport van, there's a camera, and you can look over the shoulder of the driver and as you pass by the Swamp Fox roller coaster. Now, there were other scenes shot in the area, just south of Myrtle Beach, technically outside of the city limits, but around where the Pirate Land Campground is, and then north, sort of where Barefoot Landing is. But the real climax of the action happened in North Myrtle Beach at Hawaiian Rumble Golf. Now, if you know your putt-putt golf, you will recognize that this course is basically the equivalent of what Augusta is to the PGA. This is to putt-putt golf. They hold their own miniature Masters every year. But it was significant to the movie because that transport van ends up in a wreck and ends up sort of driving or crashing right into that volcano. That volcano erupts. It has flames shooting out of it about every 20 minutes. And then the two men, apparently their relationship climaxes as well because they end up in a fist fight after this wreck. So it was all very dramatic, and that's where it all took place. And it wasn't just the big studios who had success here. We had two independent films that did quite well. Swimming, as you see, came out in 2000. Now, normally, a independent film never sees the screen of a mainstream movie theater. They do the film festival circuit, and then maybe they appear in some art houses. But then if you've got an independent film that does particularly well and gets a lot of buzz, somebody will pick it up to distribute it and put it in a mainstream theater. But it always happens immediately, so they can cash in on that wave of publicity. Swimming actually had about a 5-week run, which is really impressive for an independent film in mainstream theaters, 2 years later. The reason why is because of a little red-haired teenager named Lauren Ambrose. Technically, she only played teenagers on screen. She was actually in her 20s, but she looked much younger. But in 2000, nobody knew who she was. But by 2002, she was in a very popular HBO series called 6 Feet Under. So they capitalized on her newfound fame and was able to get the movie released. Now, I'm fond of all of these movies, but this one really utilized a lot of Myrtle Beach. A lot of the scenes were filmed down on the boulevard near the Gay Dolphin, and it just so happens now that there is a temporary tattoo place right next door. In the movie, that's pretty much where a lot of the action took place. I don't know if it's this. I don't think this is the same venue, but there was a temporary tattoo place in the movie because the whole screenplay came about as a senior thesis project for a film student up at SUNY Purchase, the State University of New York in Purchase, and the student's professor became the director of this film, Bob Siegel. And so he liked what she wrote, and it was based on her experience working a summer in Myrtle Beach at a temporary tattoo place right there on the boulevard. So a lot of the action that you see and the locations that are used came from her personal experience. Her professor kind of reworked her script with a professional writer, and that became the screenplay for Swimming. And then they also utilized the natural beauty of the Myrtle Beach area by going down and shooting scenes in the Myrtle Beach State Park. One of the characters was actually camped out down there. Now, at the end of that decade, we have another independent film called My Sweet Misery. Now, if I had to pick a favorite, it might be that one, just because, well, you'll find out in a minute, actually, exactly why. It too starred a young woman who later found fame on an HBO series, Veep. So Anna Klumsky, now for you film buffs, you might recognize her as a child actor in a movie called My Girl. She played opposite Macaulay Culkin. She was the little girl. She grew up, did My Sweet Misery, and then went on to find more fame on HBO in Veep. Now, the reason why I'm really partial to this film is because it was done by Matthew William Jordan, who was he actually was a year ahead of me at Myrtle Beach High School. We were both on the newspaper staff together. Now, the premise of the film is that Anna plays a housekeeper at this hotel. Now, this is still today 31st Avenue North. It used to be the Jamaica or Jamaican. Now it's sort of just part of the resort next door, but immediately next door to is the sea captain's house. So if you've eaten the sea captain's house, you've been next door to this film location. Now, the premise is that she's a housekeeper who falls for a guest who checks into the motel in order to commit suicide. But he doesn't go through with it, but he does leave this rambling suicide note written on a roll of toilet paper. Now, now his brother comes in and saves him, and while he's out of the room, she goes in and cleans the room, finds the note, reads it, and is so touched by what he wrote that she writes back to him on another roll of toilet paper. Now, it's a cute movie. In fact, in 2009, a nationally syndicated critic said that at the end of the year, when he was summing up the year in film, he said, aside from the science fiction blockbuster from that summer and a Brad Pitt war movie, My Sweet Misery is likely the most fun that you're going to have in the theater all that year. And of its filmmaker, Matthew William Jordan, he said, well, more first-timers should be that good. Matthew also used a state park in the area. The big studios didn't tend to do this, but these independent films did. Huntington Beach State Park. In this film, it's not so much a spoiler alert because you learn pretty quickly that the suicidal man, or not so suicidal man, has a therapist, but the therapist is actually a figment of his imagination. And so their therapy sessions are held out on the beach in these lovely, comfortable chairs, but that was all staged out at Huntington Beach State Park. And then at the end, there's a very sweet, it's an endearing film. It's got a lot of salty language, not for the kids, but it is a sweet film. And at the very end, you see how everything comes to a happy ending at Huntington Beach. Now, the very last film that made it into my book was Magic Mike XXL. Now, it was not only a sequel to Magic Mike, but it was also the second movie Warner Brothers ever made in Myrtle Beach. Their budgets were about the same, Chasers and Magic Mike XXL, but Magic Mike XXL made a huge profit, not as much as the original film, but did very well. Now, the premise of the movie is that Mike, the adult entertainment dancer, I guess, or male dancer, I guess you would call him, he and his buddies are on a quest to come to Myrtle Beach for a national convention of people in their occupation. Now, it has been assured me that the convention center in Myrtle Beach has never in reality been used for that type of convention. So the convention center they actually had to use was in Savannah, Georgia. And people were very excited that Channing Tatum and all these other hunky men were coming to Savannah to make this movie. And so you had all sorts of volunteers, all walks of life, and some very prim and proper ladies that wanted to be in a movie. Yeah, they show up at the convention center, and on stage is basically a male dancer review. Yeah, some of the extras left. So the whole movie is about coming to Myrtle Beach. They talk about Myrtle Beach constantly, but the only part that's actually in Myrtle Beach is the last 30 minutes of the film. So if it's not your cup of tea, but you really want to see all the movies that were made in Myrtle Beach, just fast forward to the last 30 minutes. Now, here's some of the gentlemen who make this such a popular movie. So you have Channing Tatum in the middle, but you have Matt Bomer, Jada Pinkett Smith, she plays the MC, Kevin Nash is the big fellow in the back, and then Joe Manganiello from Deal or No Deal Island, and then Adam Rodriguez. I don't know if you remember him from CSI Miami. He doesn't quite look the same there. Now, this particular picture was taken poolside at the Boardwalk Beach Resort. Now, as you can see, I took this picture on Valentine's Day, but for the movie, on that same marquee, they welcomed everybody. Happy Independence Day. It was the 4th of July, and they also welcomed the convention attendees. And in the movie, it's in it's one of their ballrooms or conference rooms in this resort where the guys are sort of working out the final tweaks to their routine that they're going to be performing at the Myrtle Beach Convention Center later on. Now, they entered Myrtle Beach in a convertible Rolls Royce in character. This is right in front of the Fun Plaza. They had all the storefronts and everything decorated for the 4th of July. You had all sorts of red, white, and blue bunting. And you had extras dressed in shorts and T-shirts, red, white, and blue, waving little flags. Yeah, it was November when they filmed this, so you couldn't see the chill bumps. Now, they got some B-roll around Labor Day. They flew drones in so they could get the actual crowds in Myrtle Beach, but it was definitely 2 days in November. Now, the last scene of the movie was filmed. It was the last scene of the movie, and it was the last scene to be filmed. Now, at the time, there was a little ice cream shop called Izzy's. It's not there anymore, but that's basically where the last scene was shot. Because after they'd gone through the convention and they had all sort of gathered together at the boardwalk, and they're looking over the ocean. Now, this was their view. However, it was at night because in November they brought out fireworks and made it look like the 4th of July. And then when it was all over, they simply walked this way along the boardwalk for about 5 minutes, and then the whole cast and crew gathered at the 8th Avenue Tiki Bar and Grill for their wrap party. It was just the guy who booked it, who was part of the film production company, he'd checked out a few places, but he thought, well, this is nice. It was brand new at the time, and all they had to do was just walk there. And so that was the last of the movies. Now, this movie was in post-production when I did this book back in, well, it was filmed here in 2014, and so in January 15 is when I started the book. Now, normally when you're talking about a book of any type and you have a speaking engagement, it's because you are launching a book. However, this is serving as sort of a book landing. So I've had I had 2,000 copies made. They have been distributed to folks, well, all over the country who've just bought it online. But I would also give this book to the folks that were on my Tuesday Myrtle Beach History, Movies, and Music tour. On that tour, I take people along, so where you see some of these pictures, we don't get as far south as the state parks, but I'll show you where the houses were, if they're still standing, or where they used to be, and then also that Rivoli Theater. Now, since you have joined us today, this is a momentous moment in that this is the last time books, brand new books, because you can buy them secondhand online, will be available to the public. So I have about 25 books or so. I'm sure not all of you want them, but anybody who would like this book, because it's a collector's item now as of today, you are welcome to them. I have them right here. So please come up here if you would like them, and I thank you for being here today.